Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, folks, to the Concealed Carry Podcast. We'll give everybody a moment to pop in here before we jump into today's subject. It's going to be an interesting one, though.
I agree.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this home invasion that pro UFC fighter Anthony Smith experienced just a few days ago. I think it was Sunday morning, early Sunday morning. Some of you maybe have seen this video, the interview that he did with ESPN, and it's a pretty compelling story. It's very intense, and especially so because it's a very physical fight, and this is a guy that's not unaccustomed to physical fighting. Yeah, it's gonna be a good one. We're gonna break down this whole the whole situation as far as he told the story. So I watched the YouTube video, and I think Matthew has as well, and lots of lessons to learn from this one today. So where everybody at? There was a few in here, and then all of a sudden the count dropped. So trying to get my mic set exactly where I want it. Everybody surviving this coronavirus quarantine.
I hope so.
How you doing at your household?
Me?
Yeah, you get by all right?
Oh, man, I'm doing better than I deserve to be. I'm hoping everybody else is staying positive. I mean, there's only so much you can do. I know there's a lot of family members that know people that are sick, and it's got to be hard. But it's important to stay positive as much as you can.
Y'all stocked up on your TP?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe we don't use as much as other people. I don't know, but we haven't had any issues. So.
Well, I'll tell you, a family of 7 goes through a bit, but we were already well stocked, and we're doing just fine.
That's good, man. I know you guys have a whole fire team over there, and got a lot of mouths and butts and stuff. So lots of TP.
Yeah, my wife is making use of, for the first time ever, the grocery store. You can call in your order or do it online or something. I don't know how she did it, and I guess tomorrow she goes and picks everything up. Like she just shows up out front, and then they just load the vehicle with all the food.
What's the wait time for you? What's the wait time for you guys? Because for over here, it's like it's about a week wait.
I don't know. I think she placed the order a couple days ago, so I want to say Monday. Yeah, I think it was Monday. So tomorrow, Friday. So 4 or 5 days. Yeah, that's a little bit of a wait for sure. If you plan ahead, and you know what you need, and you have the things you need for right now, and then you can make use of a service like that. Not having to go out in public, go into the store, whatever. It's definitely I think it's a good way to go. So, yeah, we'd never made use of that kind of service before, or delivery or anything like that. I mean, we live really close to our grocery store, so just run down there and get it. But anyway, well, let's get into today's topic again. We're talking about this home invasion story as told by pro UFC fighter Anthony Smith. It's really compelling. And tons of great lessons to learn from it. So let's get into that. Let's kick off the recorded portion of today's show with a 3, 2, and 1. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 406. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and co-host today, Graybeard himself, as you have now been officially crowned by David, one of our loyal listeners.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. You guys had a good show Tuesday. That was good.
Yeah,
I like those DG stories. A lot of crazy stuff.
There was a lot going on that day. There was a lot that's happened the last month too.
Yeah.
And so much of it too. Like I think I made the comment in Tuesday's episode that in regards to that Tulsa, Oklahoma shooting, where the guy basically stopped a mass shooting.
Sure. Yeah.
Potentially, it definitely had the potential to turn into that. I mean, it sounded like there were multiple people out in front of this business, and this lady just starts lighting everything up, and miraculously, apparently, nobody else is hit. At least that I could see in the reporting. But this guy, concealed carrier, steps right up and puts an end to it, and I just like I didn't even hear about this.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Until just I think Monday is when I first heard that story, and by that point it was already a week plus old.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. We're just all so focused on this coronavirus. I don't mean to make a joke about something that probably we shouldn't joke about. So I had to catch myself there. I do find that there's some humor and I like to find the humor in life sometimes. Crazy things happening these days, and got to keep it light. But I'll be profesh for the episode today. Now, today's episode, we are talking about how pro UFC fighter Anthony Smith had to fight for his life and the life of his family on Sunday morning, this last Sunday morning. He had a break-in at his home, and it was a hand-to-hand, all-out brawl between him and this guy. A very compelling story. The interview was done with ESPN MMA. I never even knew that channel existed on YouTube. So you can go find it. And we'll make sure in the show notes today that we get the link for that posted as well, so folks can go and watch that interview for yourself. It's about a half hour long, so you may not want to or care to listen to all that. But, of course, people listen to you and I drone on for an hour, so maybe
Sure.
maybe our listeners will surprise me. But
Less painful.
but we'll make sure in the published episode we put the link for that YouTube interview. And very, very, very compelling story with tons of lessons to be learned. Even though I'm sure that wasn't approached from a concealed carry perspective at all, there's just so much great applicability to what we do here, the analysis that we do. I mean, this is essentially a justified save story minus the gun.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get into that, but today's episode is brought to you by, and it's very timely, Complete Home Defense, our video training course about complete home defense. When we were coming up with the title for that course, it was like, what do we call it? Well, it was about home defense, and we did try to make it pretty comprehensive. I mean, looking back at it now, there's probably a few things here and there I would maybe add to it a little bit more or do a little bit differently, but it's pretty complete. So we just decided to call it the Complete Home Defense course. Check it out at concealedcarry.com/CHD. If you want to learn more about how to prepare your home, I mean, there's sections in there talking about the physical security of your home itself, talking about safe rooms, talking about staging of firearms, having things at the ready. That's going to come into play in this story that we're going to cover today. And then of course the actual defense part of it and some of the tactics involved and things like that. So 8 hours of content, 3 DVD set. If you choose to order the physical DVDs, you can get online only streaming as well. You can also get online streaming and the DVDs all together in one package. Check it out again, concealedcarry.com/CHD. So Anthony Smith, I'll kick it off here with a brief summary of the story, and you fill in any gaps I miss. So I think that it's important that we kind of get the gist of the story out, and then we can start breaking it down and looking for these lessons to be learned, which, like I said, I think there are many. And you and I were talking before the show began, and yeah, there's a lot of meat to this whole thing. Basically, you have a pro UFC fighter. I mean, if you're in the UFC, you're basically pro, right? Ultimate Fighting Championship, which is an MMA form of fighting, mixed martial arts. You fight in the octagon, right, or whatever. So I'm not like the biggest follower of the fights and stuff like that. I mean, I pay some loose attention here and there. I have a great deal of admiration for people that go into the ring or into the octagon and just beat the tar out of each other. I mean, it takes a great deal of strength, preparedness, mindset. There's a lot that goes into a fight like that. That there's carryover to what we do as far as civilian self defenders, right? But so here you have pro fighter Anthony Smith. He's asleep at home. They're in bed. Him and his wife. He's got 3 kids, 3 little, I think, girls. I think they're all girls. So everybody's asleep, and somebody comes into their home. A man, youngish man. I don't remember what age he said he was, but fairly young, 20 something. And the man comes into the home and he's like screaming, yelling. Who knows what he's yelling, but he's just, as he comes into the house. So, you imagine you wake up to that, right? Like you jump out of bed, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? You just hear all this screaming in your house, and it's a voice you don't recognize. It's not, there's you and your wife and your 3 little daughters, right? So clearly there's something wrong. So he gets out of bed and he goes out there and basically tackles this guy in his living room, and a fight ensues. A very, very physical fight. So Anthony doesn't have a gun on him or with him. He has a gun. He owns a gun. He has one he carries even concealed. I believe he's permitted to do so. He talked about how he carries concealed, and this is in Nebraska. But he didn't get his gun, and we'll talk about that some more as to maybe some of the why and where his gun was and stuff like that. But so no gun. This is a physical fight. He's trying to subdue this guy. He's trying to get control of his hands, trying to just keep this guy from posing a threat to him and his family. Anthony's wife gathers his girls, and they basically sequester themselves to the bedroom, which I thought that was really good. And then also his mother-in-law comes out of where her room is at some point, and she ends up handing him a knife, which he doesn't have to use per se. He doesn't have to cut or stab this guy with the knife, but he has it right there. And I think he said he kind of put it to him. I don't know if he was like holding it against him or what, but police were called, and took like 8 minutes or something for police to arrive, which was pretty quick. But he just talks about how this is a long fight. He didn't think, number one, he was surprised at how strong this guy was, this fighter, right? And surprised at how long, it was going, and he wondered if he had the strength and the ability to keep it up until help could arrive. So that's basically the gist of the story. The cops get there, arrest the man. Anthony is fine. He's not physically harmed too much. He talked. He's like, I'm not really bruised or bleeding or anything like that. It really sounds like he had the upper hand, but it was kind of like, it was one of those things where, okay, he had the upper hand, but for how long? How long could he hold out? How much and for how long could he do this while this fight was continuing on? And he talks about there's like blood on the walls and stuff. So he obviously roughed up the home invader, but there's that. It goes to show just how violent this event was. But fortunately, again, it all worked out. He lived to see another day, and his family's okay. Terrified probably, but everybody's okay. So that's kind of the summary of the story. Was there anything that I missed, relevant detail-wise, Matthew?
No, that's a good place to start and give people who haven't watched the interview or listened to the interview an idea of kind of what we're talking about. So when we break it down, these different points that we think we can learn from and bring you guys some insight, you'll have some basis of reference.
Yep. Now we have Mitch, our social media manager, actually commenting on the Facebook comments today. And Mitch, I know, follows this stuff closely. He really likes watching the fights. And he says that Anthony Smith's currently ranked number 5 among light heavyweights. He weighs in at 205 pounds. So he's a decent-sized guy. And his opponent, this home intruder, he said weighed about 170 pounds. So quite a bit lighter. He's got 35 pounds on this guy. And he says several times about how surprised he was, the fight and how strong this smaller man was compared to him. Keep in mind. So number 5 he's one of the best in the world as a UFC fighter, right?
And he's still in camp right now because he's training for a fight
Right.
like in a week. So he's not like out of shape. He's probably his peak shape that he could be right
He's actively working out, training right now. Yep, that's right. Getting ready for a fight later this month, which is kind of like, well, I'm not sure if that's going to get postponed or what, depending on how things go. So yeah, you're exactly right. He's actively training right now for a world-class fight, right? Big fight. So, and that's kind of that's the point, one of the big points. So I think we just tackled that head on right now. It is not unusual in civilian self-defense situations for there to be some kind of physical altercation. In all the stories we covered, we just talked about this, Jacob and I did in Tuesday's Justified Saves episode. We covered all these stories, and there's several in there. Well, and some of those I think were where the good guys ended up getting shot, as well as themselves doling out, some lead as well. But the point is that physical fights happen. They really do. You helped me with some analysis of Justified Save stories, a podcast a while back. I need to go and update some of those statistics as well, and finish rounding out some of those numbers. But I think we pulled out of that about a 25% of the time where somebody uses a gun in self-defense, there is also some kind of physical altercation as part of that event. A lot of times these start out as home invasion type scenarios where before the individual, the homeowner, the occupant of this home, this residence, can get to their gun or get their gun ready or whatever it is, that they're in a physical fight first.
Yeah.
And so, there's also plenty of examples too outside of the home where physical altercations occur, and then of course they turn deadly. So the point is, you may find yourself in some kind of physical fight for your life.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add in right there is to say, like, you and I, we know, and we cover this, and a lot of the listeners know that most burglars don't want to confront the homeowner, right? Like, somebody being home is a deterrent for somebody who wants to steal a TV or, whatever they want to steal, right? But for the people that don't care, right? Like the people that come in and don't care if somebody's home, those are the people that you need to be concerned most about, because they're the most violent, and they're the ones that are often armed or are willing to get into a confrontation, or it doesn't dissuade them. So it's like, yeah, it's great that a lot of criminals say, yeah, I don't really want to get in a confrontation with the family, but it's those other ones that don't care, and that's why those people are so much more violent.
That's right. So now sometimes something that's said by people that they'd say, well, why would you ever let your threat get that close to you? Like that's a failure if you, and people will sometimes point at situational awareness, or whatever, like, wow, why would you ever let anybody get so close that it turns physical? Yeah. Well, the reality is, I mean, we can think that all we want. And that is definitely the goal. Like, I don't go out in public and typically allow people to get that I have no idea who they are, strangers, get that close to me, right? If someone's invading my personal space, I try to take action to keep that from occurring. But the reality is, in a public human sphere of interaction, there's times where that's not always possible. Mm-hmm. And it's also not possible to be 100% totally switched on, dialed in, fully situational aware all the time. It's not possible. People can say that they are, but you know what? If I followed you around for the day, just kind of like as a invisible observer, I guarantee you, or even if I followed you around just as somebody stalking you, I'll bet you in almost every one of our lives, I could find somewhere where you're vulnerable, where you let your guard down just a little bit, because it's pretty much impossible to be that switched on all the time. And if you are that switched on all the time, then you're probably a little bit paranoid and crazy. All right. So that's just the reality of life. Sometimes physical altercations are going to happen, even when we least expect it. I know that's something that happened here with Anthony. I was just reviewing part of the video before we got started, and he talks about how like this was about like the worst time this could have happened. And we'll get into that. It has to do when he was answering questions about his gun and if he had a gun and where his gun was and stuff like that. Like just like Murphy's Law at its finest from this story here. That just he actually said, like, the one time I don't have that gun by my bedside and this happens. That's how life is. That's how Murphy's Law works.
Yeah.
You're like, the one time you're like, not a big deal that I, didn't lock my doors or didn't turn on my security system or didn't close my garage door, which that's actually how this intruder got into Anthony's house. Was he came through apparently an open garage door. Anthony explained how he thought his wife had closed it. His wife thought he had closed it, and just there was this miscommunication that resulted in a situation where the garage door got left open all night, and the door between the house and the garage was clearly not locked. So even those kind of mistakes happen. I've done that. Now, fortunately, interestingly enough, I mean, we're in this kind of older house, but we don't have a door from our house to our garage. Super hugely inconvenient, but it also comes with the strength that is not another weak point or potential weak point for my home for somebody to gain access, at least to the home itself. Right. Anyway, so all right. Sorry, I got kind of off into the weeds there a little bit, bringing it back. What's the first lesson that you take away from this yourself personally, Matthew?
Well, this is, and I think this is the overarching lesson to learn from this, and it comes straight from this dude's mouth, right? He's a top class fighter. We already covered. He outweighs this dude by 50 pounds. He is actively striking this guy and hitting this guy, and says he's never ever had a fight like that in his life. He's never been that scared in his life. And he realized that he was fighting for his life. Now, there's nothing taking away from what UFC fighters do in the ring, because, I mean, they beat each other good, right? And like boxers and things like that, they hit each other hard, but it's controlled violence. And we have to realize that that's controlled violence.
There's rules.
Right. And so they know if I get knocked out, this guy isn't going to thrust a knife through my chest, right, and then go kill my family. They know that if they tap out, the game's over. Everybody, is okay. If you've never been in a fight for your life, like a knockdown, drag out, where it's not a bar fight where there's people pushing and shoving and pulling people apart, and maybe somebody gets a good hit or something like that and it's over in 30 seconds. I'm talking about a fight, a sustained fight, where somebody is willing to do whatever it takes to either get away from you or put you into the ground. You don't understand it's hard. I don't want to say you don't. It's hard to understand the amount of violence that takes place in a fight. And so I can remember fights that I've been in where they happen really quickly. As a police officer, it happens real quickly and it's violent, but it's over. And some where, you're fighting and I'm like, I don't want to hurt this guy. I'm just trying to get cuffs on the dude, but he is, grabbing at your gun or grabbing at gear and trying to just pound you into the ground. And it's like, it's those times that you realize the fragility of human life and how quickly you could be the best fighter, the ranked 5th in the world, MMA fighter, but it doesn't matter if this scrappy dude that 50 pounds lighter than you picks up a pen and jams it through your throat, right? It doesn't matter how much training or how many pull-ups or whatever it is, that's gonna really affect you. And so and there's no rules, like you said. So I think my big takeaway, and I hope like probably what he got out of it, the incident, but better that everybody could learn from that, is that, it doesn't matter how big and bad you are, a fight that is not sanctioned with rules can go any way at any time, and you have to do your best to not give up the mindset that you have to survive, that you have to do what it takes. So that was my kind of overall arching lesson that I learned from this.
Yep.
Or kind of principle.
Yeah, that's all correct. The thing with a fight is you want it over as fast as you can, because time is not your friend. If it goes, the longer it goes, it's just more opportunities for you to get hurt, and time for you to get tired out. Now, somebody asked here if the intruder was on something. We don't know if he was hopped up on drugs or if he just was mentally unstable. But based on if you watch the interview and kind of pay attention to some of the things that come out from what Anthony says about that and what the guy said and some of the things he did, like he's not in his right mind, and that could be because of drugs. It could be because of a mental illness. I mean, in the end, it doesn't really matter, because somebody that is extremely frenetic and upset and paranoid and all of that, like, which is basically what's going on here. You have a guy, you have a crazy guy that is coming to your house and is going crazy. He's going nuts on you. So that is a very, very, very difficult place to be. I mean, cops have such a difficult job. You just touched on, Matthew, where you're submitting somebody, you're arresting them, and guys don't want to go quietly, right? Putting up a fight, that is a difficult place to be, because you're trying to balance that. Well, I'm not trying to hurt him, right? Because I don't want to get dinged for abusing this guy, as a cop. At the same time, you got to safely get him secured and handcuffed and placed in a squad or whatever. So cops have a very, very difficult job, and that's the thing. Like, I'm going to use this Anthony Smith case as an example at times when I get into these conversations and interactions with people, especially online, where they see body cam footage and they question the actions of police, and they'll say, well, why did he have to do this? Why did he have to do that? Why did they, why did this cop put this guy in a chokehold? Stuff like that. That just doesn't seem right. Well, until you've been in a fight, an all-out fight, like you really have no place to criticize or say much about that, because it's not, your fight. This is actually kind of paraphrasing a quote from Dave Spalding. Actually, I saw it come up again in a Facebook group yesterday. Your fight is not what you want it to be. It is what it is, right? Like what that's getting at is, like, you can think all these things in your head about how you want your fight to go and how you think you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and it's just going to all go, exactly the way you planned. But that's not reality. Your fight is what it is. It's not what you want it to be. And if you get stuck in, trying to make it what you want it to be, you're going to make a critical error and you're going to lose that fight. This goes for a hand-to-hand fight. It goes for a gun fight. It goes, any of these situations. You don't get to pick and choose your fights. Okay, all right. As a defensive-minded person, you don't get to choose. You are only reacting to what is being done or perpetrated against you. So you don't have control over this other person. You don't control their agency. They picked that fight. They picked that time. They picked that place. Yeah. Now you just have to deal with it. And the dealing with it, that's the ugly part, and you don't always get to it doesn't always work out. In fact, I would say it pretty much never works out perfectly and beautifully. The way you would like it to be or the way you would envision it to be.
Yeah. And he even mentions in the interview, he's like, well, during a fight, I get amped up, I stretch out before the fight, I'm ready to go. And this time, it's like game on. You're in your underwear or whatever, right? Like if you go to find out what's going on in your house and you're in your underwear, that's what you're fighting in. And that dude, so it's kind of you go from asleep to in a full 100% fight in a matter of 30 seconds, 20 seconds, right? And so
Yeah.
and that person's already ready. Like they know somebody's in this house. If they come out, I'm ready to go. Like I don't care. I'm ready to fight. I just was doing this or that at the next door neighbor's house. I'm ready to go. So they're ready, and you're like trying to catch up. And so it's just like you said, and that's a really good quote. Is you don't get to choose, or it's not what you want it to be. You don't get to choose, the place, the time, what's going to go on. So the rules even.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So let's start. Actually, let's look at the home. Let's look at the kind of the envelope, right, of the dwelling, and let's look at some failings there. All right. So none of this is meant to be a judgment, on Anthony Smith. Nothing. This is not meant to be armchair quarterbacking. This is meant to just look at the facts as we know them and the situation and go, what can we learn from that? All right. And a lot of these are things that Anthony said himself, that hey, like I know I screwed up, or I know that we made this mistake, and I kind of alluded to one of those. So let's start with that. All right. So let's just get this all out in the open. So a couple of things. So we have a garage door that's left wide open all night long, and the door from the garage to the house is also not locked. So, and then he had a security system he talked about, and is even like pretty new apparently, but wasn't using it, didn't have it turned on. So I presume the garage door was opened or whatever. I mean, depending on where you have all your sensors and things at and how you have them set, but there might have been an alarm that may have gone off. I don't know that would have made a big difference in that case once he had already broken through the physical barrier of the envelope of the house, because he says that he pretty much came in and was yelling immediately from coming in. So that was about as a much warning as an alarm system would have given you anyway. So, I mean, those are a couple of things really quick right off the bat. Just looking at physical security of the premises. We want to make sure, I try to make sure I do this every night. Sometimes, and this is a team effort. My wife sometimes reminds me like, hey, did you check the windows? Did you check the doors? Did you check the security system, all that stuff? Most of the time I've done my checks, but occasionally I'm tired and I'm getting in bed and she's like, did you do that? Ah, crap, I didn't. There's other times where she will have done it, but the point is every night I try to make a point to go around, check all the windows, just make sure they're locked, secured, check the doors, make sure they're locked, secured, make sure my security system is engaged. And so just getting into that habit and that routine, it's so easy to get comfortable and be like, we live in a kind of quiet neighborhood in Nebraska where nothing bad ever happens. He says that several times in his interview. There's like nothing like this ever happens in our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Well, you know how many times I've seen that or heard that story from the many stories, these justified save stories we've covered through the years, all the time. Nothing like this ever happens in our neighborhood. Well, until it does. Right. I used to think that about my neighborhood until we had a crazy incident happen. In fact, we've had a couple of them now. So my neighborhood's turning into. I can't say it's it's not the quiet neighborhood I once used to think it was. I do think that it's changed a little bit, but won't go into that. But so you see where I'm getting at. So like I think the lesson learned here is don't assume you live in a quiet, sleepy neighborhood. Don't leave your doors unlocked, right? Do a nightly check and just make that part of the routine. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Amen.
So you can add to that, or you can go on to what's kind of the next lesson learned from this whole incident.
Yeah, so obviously the exterior security kind of breaks down, right? So they get inside, and he says that he has a firearm. He's a concealed carry permit holder. He carries a firearm with him in a bag. I'd assume this is like when he's traveling about, because he mentions concealed carry and probably wouldn't mention it if he just leaves it at the home for home defense. But so I assume because it's in a bag, he transports it with him, which is also kind of interesting because this dude probably could handle himself in a lot of fights if somebody wanted to take his wallet or whatnot, but he finds it necessary to carry a firearm with him. And I think, that's obviously smart because you never know who you're going to be up against, right? Or what's going to happen. So, but he carries the firearm in a bag. Typically, he says he brings the bag into the home with him, puts it by the bedside before he goes to bed. He takes the gun out and puts it on his nightstand, and we'll talk about that later. But the problem is he says 99% of the time I do that. This is the first time that I left the gun in the bag. Now, we can speculate on where the bag is, if it was next to his bed or was it left in the car or where was it, but suffice to say he doesn't have access to the gun when he needs it, when he hears somebody screaming in the room or in the house. So he goes and confronts dude without gun, which if he had a firearm, who knows if he would have had to shoot the guy or whatnot. But you have to think that if this attack would have happened, he probably wouldn't have had to fight so much with this dude, and thank God he didn't have a knife or a gun or what not the attacker. So probably a mistake, and he admits that they caught me slipping, right? Like he just he got too comfortable, too complacent, and left the gun not accessible when he needed it.
That's right. Yeah, I think this whole situation would have played out completely differently if he had had access to his gun. Now, let's be straightforward here. How would that have played out? Well, he could have come out with gun and issued commands and made it clear that he was armed, and maybe that would get this guy to leave the house at least, or to quit coming further into the home or whatever. But I'll tell you what, if the gun had come into the picture at all, there's a much greater probability there's a great probability that it could have ended up being fired or needing to be fired. Mm-hmm. So Anthony could actually have a whole different situation to deal with in the aftermath if he had actually had that gun and had to fire it. So in a way, he's almost fortunate to have not had to use a gun. However, having that option would have been far preferable, certainly, because Anthony had to greatly put himself at risk to have to physically fight with this guy. You don't know what that guy's got on him. You don't know if he has a weapon. Even if you don't see a weapon, he may still have something, So it's one thing where if you don't see a weapon on somebody, and so you maybe have a hesitancy of using a gun because you're like, well, there's some distance between me and him. I don't see a weapon clearly, so I am not going to fire my gun yet, right? That's one thing. But when you are right on top of somebody, you don't know what you don't know about what they have or don't have, or what their level of preparedness is or not. And so that can get very ugly for you very fast. If that guy's got a knife on him and he's able to grab it, I mean, you could have a dozen knife wounds in you before you realize what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, once somebody starts going to work on you, sewing machine style with a knife, like that gets ugly real quick, and that fight can change really fast. So, having that gun would have been my preference, absolutely, and I know that I would have handled that situation very differently. I mean, at the very least, okay. So let's talk about one good thing. He talks about how his wife gathered his girls. Gathered them into their bedroom, into the master bedroom, it sounded like. Told the oldest daughter, hey, you stay here with your sisters. You keep, you make sure nobody leaves. Mm-hmm. I think the wife was there with them for a time, but then she came out and was sort of like blocking the hallway or something like that. So it was almost like she was making sure, hey, I am, I'm going to also be this kind of secondary fallback, that before this guy can get to my children, he's going to have to go through me. Think how different that the tactics involved could have been if Anthony had had his gun, where he could have gotten his wife and the daughters and the mother-in-law and just got everybody barricaded into the master bedroom while he guarded the door, or took cover and just guarded that hallway. And then he's got a natural choke point where his threat's got to pass through. He's going to have the upper hand. He's got the gun, and he could have kept his distance and kept himself, his wife, his mother-in-law, the kids, everybody, much greater level of separation between threat or potential threat and him and his family. Instead, in this situation, he had to actually involve himself physically into the situation.
Yeah.
So very different tactics had to be used based on the fact that his gun was unavailable.
Yeah, and thank God it resolved the way it did, because he mentions during the fight he's asking the guy, "Hey, are you alone?" And the guy says, "No, I'm not alone. There's somebody else with me." So
and he started calling out for like a Luke or something, like, "Hey, hey man, come and help me."
Right. So
then what's going through your head?
Yeah, imagine this. Now, he's a great fighter. He's fighting. He's saying he can control one person, but imagine that now you say, wait a second, I'm putting all my effort into controlling one dude. There's another guy in my home, and now they can get to my family, right? It doesn't matter how good I am with this guy. If there's somebody else, so fortunately, he, it was either a bluff or he's just crazy and was screaming out different names. But
the dude was crazy.
Yeah. So there was actually only one guy, but
yeah,
this is that kind of dovetails into what you were saying with what Dave Spalding said, is like, you don't get to choose. It's not what you want, right? Like, so we all think like, okay, noise in the house, I'm gonna go take my gun. It's gonna be one dude, and if I have to shoot him, I'll shoot him, whatever. But what if it's not one dude? What if it's 2 or 3 or 4? You know what I mean? Like, all of a sudden that, you have a firearm with 8-round capacity. What if these guys are armed and they start shooting back at you, and you're hit first before you see how it's just, we all have these things that we think are going to play out in our mind, and it's probably not going to be that way. And so whether it's a fight, whether it's a gunfight, it's the same thing. It's just you're using a gun in the fight, and it normally doesn't play the way you have it conjured up in your mind.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So speaking of that potential second or third threat, assuming that there's more than one home intruder, which that certainly could have been the case. I mean, boy, that would have just made my skin crawl if here I'm barely hanging on, trying to get this guy's arms and hands under control and keep him subdued so he can't hurt me. And all of a sudden he starts calling for a friend. Oh crap. I mean, geez, that gets dicey really quick. Now at some point, and I don't remember the exact timing on all of this, as it relates to, this intruder calling out for a supposed friend. But at some point, Anthony's mother-in-law comes out of, I guess, wherever her room is, and he actually has her retrieve a knife, and she gets a knife, I think, from the kitchen and hands it to him. And then apparently from there, she goes outside. The thinking there being that I guess they live kind of at the end of a road, or they got a long driveway or something. Like, it was a little bit hard to maybe find the house, and so she thought it was prudent to go out and try to help police be guided to where they needed their help. I can understand that logic, but again, think, well, what if there was a second or a third person involved in this? Mm-hmm. Where are they? Maybe they're out front keeping an eye out on things. Maybe that mother-in-law goes outside thinking, this, I'm going to go help police find our house, but then she's all of a sudden put herself in jeopardy, in harm's way, by this second or third assailant that's outside the home or in a different part of the home. Mm-hmm. So there's that factor. That's why it's almost always preferable in home invasions to try to, we call it IFDR, isolate the family, defend the room. And actually, Jacob conjured that term, and that's a principle. That's a main guiding principle in the complete home defense video course that we talked about earlier as one of today's sponsors, if you will, of the podcast. But the strategy is do what you can to get the family isolated. In one place is preferable because it's a lot easier to defend that way. And then, and typically that's going to be in a room that you've designated as a safe room. So you're isolating the family there, you're barricading, and then you're protecting and defending yourself in that safe room or from that safe room. So by having people go elsewhere, including outside, even if it's with the best of intentions, that is always a risky move potentially. All right. Could it cost seconds or minutes in officers finally finding your house if you're not out there to help guide them? It could, but we got to balance risk with potential reward here. And I'm not sure the juice is worth the squeeze when we don't know the full extent of the situation. So that's another great lesson to look at this situation. Go, hey, mom, get back and go to the bedroom. Go to the bedroom. Go find the girls. Go find my wife. Whatever it is, rather than allowing her to maybe go out of the area of the home that to be relatively secure. You're then going into an unsecured space.
Yeah. And to dovetail into the interaction with the mother-in-law, right? So you mentioned she brings him a knife during this fight, right? Now it's a hand-to-hand fight. No other weapons have been, brought out by either party. But the mother-in-law brings Anthony a knife, and it's interesting because this is a principle that I find when I'm speaking to like new concealed carriers and things like that, and it just never kind of crossed their mind. So think of Anthony mentions he has the knife, and now he realizes that it's much more difficult to fight with one hand because he can't use he doesn't feel it necessary at this point to go ahead and stab this dude, right? So now what he's done is he's made it much more difficult for him to A, control the person, and B, now there's a knife involved that he may have to fight over, or even in the process of trying to hold this guy down and not stab him, he ends up getting cut or stabbed, right? So it's the same principle that when I'm talking to like new concealed carriers or people that haven't thought it through and say, when you draw out your firearm, it has to be a situation, not legally putting that aside. I'm talking about tactically. If you draw that firearm out and you're not prepared to use it, I'm not saying you have to use it, but you're not prepared to use it, and the amount of force that you need to use isn't justified with a firearm, and that person still wants to fight you. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to shoot an unarmed person and say, well, I feared for my life because he kept approaching me after I pointed a firearm at him? That's probably not a good legal justification. And secondly, it's not a good tactical position because now you're fighting with a gun in your hand. And so you either have to reholster that gun and go, fight with two hands, or you're going to fight with one hand, and you're at a great disadvantage. So I think we always think if we have a weapon, whether it's a gun or a knife or a bat or whatever, that we're better off. In certain situations, of course, that's true. But if the amount of force that tool is capable of inflicting isn't what you're ready to use against that person, then that's a major disadvantage. And so I thought that was really interesting that he pointed that out, and he said, hey, I realize that now I have this knife and I can't control the dude because I only have one hand. So
yeah, it's a very valid point where if you have that in your hand and you don't have the intent of using it, then yeah, absolutely. And he actually talks about how he set it down or tossed it aside for part of the fight because he's like, crap, I'm losing control of this guy. So you either need to use that tool or put that tool away. Now, let's be clear. Legally speaking, in most states, including I think Nebraska, even there's pretty strong precedent that when you have, I mean, this guy has broken into your home. This is a home invasion, and whether this guy initiated the fight or not inside the home, at this point, this is a physical fight. This guy is, posing a threat to bodily threat to Anthony at this point. I mean, I wouldn't be questioning him if he decided to use deadly force, right?
Absolutely not.
But he didn't feel like he wanted to or needed to or was ready to, and that's his decision. Okay,
Exactly.
Some of you listening will be like, "Well, that's not how I would have handled it." Well, that you're not him. This is how he decided to use it. All right, so there's legally what you may or can do, and there's morally or whatever your values are based on. There's that moral component where we all have to be able to live with ourselves at the end of the day. And for every person, that's going to be a little bit different. Where we get in trouble is where those values or those morals are not consistent, as far as like if we follow those morals or those values, we violate law. That's a problem. But and keep in mind that the perspective of someone like Anthony Smith. I mean, he knows that he's fairly capable as a fighter. Being one of the best in the world. And in certain circumstances, in certain cases, that could certainly, and that would come into play if for whatever reason he crossed some line, or there was, or investigators felt there was a line crossed, so they decided to investigate, pursue charges, potentially, try to take him to court. That absolutely would have been a part of a case involving him. That, hey, you are a very skilled fighter. You're very physically strong. You're very physically fit. You're at the peak of your condition at this time as you're training for an actual fight and everything. So his perspective, just to put this all in context, what I'm trying to get at is what his perspective is not necessarily what mine or Matthew's or somebody else's would be. And so we got to recognize that fact. Whether it's based in law or not is really irrelevant at this point. I mean, what's happened has happened. But from a tactical side of things, introducing the knife into the equation, I think was probably, especially where he was not intending yet on using it, I think was probably not the best move because it again made it so that he couldn't control that guy as well. It meant that there was a possibility now of his adversary gaining control of that knife. I was particularly kind of concerned when I realized, listening to his interview, and he talks about putting down or kind of tossing aside the knife, and I'm like, oh, that's an unsecured weapon now at this point. If he really loses control of this guy, that guy could get that weapon and use it against him. So just introducing the knife into the equation at that moment was probably not the best tactical play. And I think he understood that, looking back, and analyzing everything himself. So it's another one of those things. It's a great sort of data point for us as outsiders looking in and analyzing this to go, that's a good thing to consider. If you're going to have that weapon and you're not ready to put it into use, then that weapon poses not only a threat against your adversary, but a threat potentially against you. So, yeah. Good lesson learned.
And if I could just interject one thing while we're on this topic and kind of tie it into like the concealed carriers who are listening and stuff like this. We often talk about people carrying a backup gun or a secondary, like a secondary weapon, like a knife or something, right? Now, you possibly, if you get into a knockdown, drag out fight with somebody, you possibly could protect that one firearm, right? Whether you carried appendix or strong side hip or wherever. Now, if you are in a knockdown, drag out fight with somebody and you have an ankle holster and a firearm that you're carrying on your waist, if that person gets around your ankle, right, and you're protecting the gun that's around your waist, or you haven't gotten to it yet, now the opportunity for a gun to get into their hands is there, or a knife. So just when you start thinking about carrying a backup gun, remember, it can't just be, well, this is just an extra thing that I carry. It has to be something that well thought out, and that you can defend against a gun grab or whatnot, right? In the way you carry it. I just think that it's important, because while we're on this topic, I've seen guns come out of ankle holsters during fights with police officers, and all of a sudden, there's a gun that's in the mix that's unsecure, and it's for your backup, but now it's not. It's free for all for whoever can grab it first.
For every weapon that you carry, not only do you need to have a plan for how to use it, but also how to protect it. Absolutely. I mean, talk about so often we spend time talking about retention of our primary gun that we carry on ourselves. But yeah, if you are carrying a backup or a knife, all that stuff, it all comes into the equation of things, that we have to have a plan for using it and a plan for preventing its use against us as well. Good observation there. Let's talk some more about this gun that he is an owner of. You talked earlier about how he transports it in a bag. He just says that in the interview, that he's asked, where was your gun? And he's like, well, it's in my bag, a bag that I carry with me. So it does sound like that his preferred method of carry is off body, that's kind of the norm, that he has a gun that we don't know what the gun is, that's also irrelevant, but that he has a gun that he carries for personal defense, and it goes to and fro with him in some sort of bag, whether it's a backpack or a computer bag, laptop bag, whatever, some sort of bag. And it sounds like the normal routine is that, I imagine that he's got some gym that he's going to and training at. He's a very high level fighter, so traveling someplace and then coming back with that in the bag and taking it inside the house, and sounds like it goes next to the bed, and then at night it comes out of the bag and goes onto the nightstand. All right. So, whether Anthony or not carried this gun in a holster on a day-to-day basis is irrelevant, because this is in the middle of the night and he's in bed and he's not wearing a gun in a holster. But what I am going to point out is that, had this been even a situation that occurred during daylight hours, he still, he may have found himself in a situation where that gun was not readily accessible in the home or out of the home. And so that's always one of the downsides and potential risks of, as far as not being able to be effective with that tool if you're carrying off the body, because it's not as readily accessible. It's not as fast. It's not as smooth. It's not as predictable as simply going to your waistband and grasping your gun that is always there and is consistently in the same location all the time. So that's another great lesson learned, just, the dangers of off-body carry. But here's another less obvious one. And I know I've talked about it, but I don't think this is one that a lot of people think about that much. And the less obvious lesson here to be learned is that the tendency when transporting and carrying a gun off our body, so in a bag typically, as that's the most common method for off-body carry, the tendency is to become a little bit more relaxed in the security of that gun, and to not take steps to make sure it's always accessible and always ready to be put into use. So we recognize that Anthony's a father of 3 children, and they're all under the age of 7 or 8 years old. These are little kids, and I'm sorry, but having a gun unsecured for any amount of time in a bag, something that's not locked, something that's not, on your person at all times, which clearly it's become a habit where it's not always right beside him. I mean, if he was in bed asleep when this all happened, and the gun was not in the bag next to the bed like he said it almost always is, then where is it? Right? Now, there may be a perfectly good explanation for that. It could have been in his vehicle. But don't forget, the vehicle or the garage was left open. So, I mean, what if this guy came in, actually, we know from other statements made by Anthony in his interview that this guy had wandered the neighborhood and had made his way. He actually had gone into somebody else's home and that somebody else had scared this individual out of their home. And he then continued, and I imagine cops had already, I think cops actually probably responded fairly quickly, and probably because they were already on their way to that neighborhood, because there was other break-ins that had occurred. And we know that this guy had also gone into and through other people's vehicles. So again, I asked the question, where was that bag and where was that gun? It wasn't next to his bed. So it was somewhere. And this guy could have found that gun. And now we're talking about a huge tactical problem. Now we're talking about bad guy in-house with a gun, your gun, and you don't have anything to defend yourself with. Mm-hmm. Potentially.
And not to say that that's where the gun was, but just hypothetically speaking, and as a tactical consideration, think about those types of things, because it's just another reason we think about, well, I don't leave the gun in the car because I don't want somebody to steal it. Well, that's true, but you also don't know if somebody's going to break into your car, find a gun, and say, well, now I have a gun, I might as well go inside and tie these people up and find out what they have, right? So, totally.
Yep. So, I mean, if Anthony was listening to this, and I doubt he would be, but if he were, again, we're not here to judge him or criticize him, at least too harshly. But I would ask him to give some serious thought now, and I think he probably has thought about many things. Whether he's thought about this particular thing or not, I don't know. But as it relates to the safety of his children, it is not asking a lot to keep that gun secured on your person throughout the day if it's not going to be secured in a safe. Or, my preference for quick access is a quick access vault, a little handgun vault. There's so many good ones these days that serve the purpose, at least, that are quick access. You can keep that gun ready, staged, right there beside your bed, or in other areas of the home. You can have multiple even staged that are still very quick access, but will keep it secured in as far as those 2 and 3 and 7 and 10-year-olds are even concerned. So that should be taken. That there should be some serious thought given to how Anthony is carrying, transporting, and storing and staging his firearm. Absolutely. So, my preference would be to see, and this is a best practices type approach, right? Okay, so again, not meant to be a criticism, but this would be ideal. If Anthony kept that gun on his person throughout the day, and then all other times put away that gun in a quick access vault next to his bed. And then if he's concerned about having something at the ready somewhere else in the home, then get a second gun and have some other quick access, secure storage or staging solution for that purpose as well. If he doesn't want to carry it on his person while he's just, bumming around his house throughout the day, right? I wake up, I get dressed, I put the gun on. I'm not going anywhere, throughout the day. A lot of times at home, especially these days, I'm carrying all day long, lounging around at home. I mean, lounging, well, I typically get up and throw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt or this type of shirt, whatever. Like that's my normal dress almost every day. I'm not in sweatpants and whatever, sweatpants and wife beaters. That's not my normal, occasionally I dress down, right? A pocket holster with a 380 or something. If I got, short to the pocket, that's, but I'll still, there's rarely a moment I'm not armed on my person inside my own home, even when I'm relaxing. I don't, call it paranoid. Well, I don't care. I call it being prepared. And because I've read enough of these kind of situations to know that crap happens when you least expect it on your least prepared day, when you're like least prepared. And so I try to make sure I'm at least remotely prepared.
Yeah. I mean, and it's tough. We talked about mindset and, situational awareness and all that. But, truthfully, when you get in your home, that's one of the places you should be able to kind of dial it back, and play with your kids and not, go to sleep and not be so vigilant, right? We have to have vigilance, but not be over hyper vigilant when you're in your home. That's one of the, your security sanctuary places, right? So it's a balancing act, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It does one one common thread when we see interviews with people that have been involved in these types of situations is always like, this was like the one day that I didn't do this, or this is the one day that I decided to do this and I never do that, but I did, and I went this way instead of this way, or whatever. And it just seems to be that's how it was meant to be for that day. And so you just try to do your best and be consistent with whatever process that you implement in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. There's probably other things we could pull out of this, but I think there's some big key takeaways. Number one, secure the home and the envelope of the home, and make sure that you do a nightly check and that you're prepared. Part of going to bed is I think that is one of our weakest potential times, or least prepared times. Time where nobody can be awake 24 hours a day. Nobody truly sleeps with one eye open, even if they say they do. The brain has to shut down at some point. So part of going to bed is being prepared to go to bed, and that means, I think anyway, that you do a quick check. You make sure the house is secured. Number two, having a gun properly stored and staged, whatever fits the bill for you in that regard. As long as we're protecting the safety of any young ones that might be in the environment, because that would have made solving this dilemma for Anthony and his family a lot simpler. 3, having a good plan for your household and your family, that in the event something like this were to occur, what steps you take, your partner takes, your children take, all of that stuff. So having that as a plan. Now, the Smith family actually did pretty well, considering the circumstances.
Yeah.
So that was really well done for the most part. Number 4, considering not going out in search of even a suspected intruder. All right, so he did go out, he did confront this individual and tackle him in this fight ensued. But I'm talking even with regards to the mother-in-law going outside the home to assist responding law enforcement. I would say in most circumstances, stay put, stay isolated, stay, in that safe room, where, the variables can be much greater controlled, and you got to force the bad guy to come to you, where you control more of that, the factors involved. Okay. Of course, that becomes so much easier to do when you actually have that firearm ready and able to be put into use, should it be required. But really, so often we see people even with their guns, so they've got the gun, they're ready for use, and then they go out in search of that bad guy. They go searching the house, clearing rooms and stuff. There's exceptions to every circumstance, but I would always advise caution in going out to deal with a problem. Let the problem come to you, unless it's not an option. All right. What else did we talk about? That's 4 things I just listed off. I feel like there was probably one other big takeaway. Physical fights. Most of us probably are not, honestly, all that well prepared for it. So if we can avoid that in the first place, that's probably the best thing for most of us. I doubt anybody in our audience is as well trained or as capable as somebody like Anthony Smith. So recognize if, for whatever reason, you end up in a physical altercation, you need to solve that problem ASAP, right now, because you probably do not have the strength and stamina to put up with it for as long as he did. Mm-hmm. All right. So there's probably a few other things, but these would probably be 4 or 5 real big things I think we learned from this whole experience of Anthony Smith. And we really appreciate him for sharing his experience with a worldwide audience through his interview on ESPN. I think that's fantastic. It's actually, I think, really good and a really positive thing for this type of experience to be put out there to the general public. I mean, that's a perfect place too, a perfect avenue where his story is reaching people that aren't necessarily in the gun community and the self-defense community so much. Where hopefully that prompts people hearing a story to go, am I prepared to deal with a situation like that? Probably not. Okay, what can I do to prepare myself, my household, my family to deal with a situation like that? So I really appreciate him for sharing his story. Final comments from Matthew.
No, I think you nailed it. I can't really add much. Just I just want to echo the fact that like people listening say, we all are kind of speaking to the choir, right? Like right now, but the people that need to hear something like this, share the video or the interview with him, and maybe our analysis if have any interest, maybe people that aren't typically around guns, right? And hopefully they're thinking, well, if this guy with his skills finds it necessary to have a gun, and thinks it's important enough to protect his family, then why do I keep a can of wasp spray next to my house, next to my bedside, and think that that's gonna, what I mean? Like maybe it'll help them to kind of rethink their security and their the way they defend themselves and their families.
Yep. Good wrap up, Matthew. So, guys, again, if, I would highly encourage you to go watch this YouTube interview with Anthony, hear his story firsthand yourself, think about how you apply it to yourselves, your families, and your houses, or apartments, or wherever it is you live. And the thing that ultimately come out of this is that we all are a little bit smarter, a little bit better, a little bit more prepared in case this sort of thing were to happen to any one of us, which, you know what? Your turn could be next. You never know when that time and that day will be. A reminder to check out our complete home defense video training course. This is an 8-hour massive endeavor that we put together to hopefully help prepare people for this very thing. So go to concealedcarry.com/CHD and pick up either online copy or virtual, or that would be virtual, or actual hard copy, a 3 DVD set, or both. Check it out, concealedcarry.com/CHD. So with that, we better get on out of here. And so we'll leave you with our final words, even our now famous slogan: train right, train often, and train safe, so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care. All right. Cool. Good crowd. Finally, came in. I noticed that at least one individual commented about not getting the notification until like 25 minutes in. I've been telling you that there's been some weird notification things with Facebook, Facebook Live lately. So, but we're glad you found us. We're glad you got here. Glad you guys enjoyed the show. And we'll go ahead and end the broadcast now. So take care. We'll be back next week. Shop Talk, I think, will be from a new location on Monday. I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun. Mm-hmm. So, cool. You guys take care. Until then, sayonara.